So this week we're going to look really in the brachos that Yaakov gives. There are a lot of animal images, and we're challenged because Jews have, at least in the recent years, become very city people, very isolated from agriculture, isolated from animals and such things, and they're wait. Baruch Hashem. It's good. It's good to have such a. Right, that's they say. Emunah is Seder Zorim. That's the Emunah. So we have to try and pay attention to the animals that are described in order to get the mission, the message that they're giving us. We also are puzzled when we see certain animals that we always associate with things that are negative here in the brachos. Shevatim is compared to a snake. Snakes don't have good connotations to us, right? In Bereshis, the snake was not a sympathetic character. And we'll see something about that, but we're going to try to focus especially tonight on the donkey, on Issachar, who's the chamor, who's the donkey. Okay, now just addressing that idea of the negative animals, this is important to know. I saw in a variety of svarim, I saw Michael Zilber brought this down a few times. There's what's called an animal of Kedusha and an animal of Tumah. Meaning, we'll see animals referred to in two different aspects because each animal has its Kedusha aspect and its Tumah aspect. Okay? So therefore, that really helps sort out a lot of things we see in Chazal, where you see the same animal being referred to in two different ways. You see many negative things about dogs, and then you'll see the Marsha will say the dog is Kulo Lev. And, when Eliyahu Novi comes to town, so the dogs bark. And even that they would use the droppings of dogs to prepare the cloth for the Sefer Torah. Chemically, that was the only thing they had in the old days that was able to work the leather and to turn it into cloth, into parchment and such, and they got schar for this. On the other hand, the kelev represents chutzpah, right? There are many negative things the kelev represents. So he said that when you look, it's especially, I guess, in Sifrei Kabbalah, that there's the kelev of Kedusha, the kelev of Tumah, right? And donkeys, our topic tonight, we'll see the two ways of the donkeys are related to. Not long ago in Sefer Bereshis, we saw that Avram Avinu said, right, Shvu lochem poim hachamor. He said to Yishmael and Eliezer, right, sit with the chamor, am hadomeh lechamor. The Yishmael is compared to a chamor. Now again, the Torah doesn't call names, okay? We don't call names, oh, he's a donkey. It means that there's an aspect of it. Looking at the words, we obviously see in chamor the word chomer, material, right? The chamor represents that which is very material, but material, and this the Maharal always uses the terms chomer and tzura, material can be molded, changed, upgraded, right? To the extent that our greatest people ride on donkeys. Avram Avinu rode on a donkey. Moshe Rabbeinu rode on a donkey. And Mashiach is described as ani v'rochev al chamor. Yeah, that this is something particular, meaning that they're able to elevate and transform the material which is there. But let's try to look and focus on the world of the donkey as we see it in the Mefarshim, and try to see in our avoda what midos we can learn that Shevet Yechezkel had, and like it says at the end of the Parsha, Ish kebirchaso berach osam, Shevet Yisachar, right, that Ish kebirchaso berach osam, that he gave all of them the bracha of each one. It goes from singular to plural. Each kebir chaso, singular, berachosam, he blessed them. So in the end, all of Am Yisrael get to tap into the brachas of all of them, even though each shevet has their own particular way. Okay, so the Imre Emes, the Ger Rebbe, before World War II, so he was once in Vienna, and he asked to go visit the zoo in Vienna. That was the most famous zoo in Europe at the time. And he spent a lot of time looking at the animals. And the people with him were very surprised because the Imre Emes utilized his time down to the maximum. He would have things like 4-minute chavrusas with his grandchildren. meaning the grandchild would open a sefer, be ready, the Imre Emes would walk in holding his watch, learn with him for 4 minutes, and then move on. And they covered a lot of things in this time. So he used this time, so they were amazed that he would spend time looking at these things. They said, why? He says, the Torah and Chazal are full of animal images. Until you see the animal, you can't understand the pshat and what they're saying and why they're comparing this to that. You can't get it. Okay, so let's look at the donkey. As we said, the donkey has negative sides to it. But here, Shevet Yisachar was compared to the chamor. We'll read the pasuk. Yisachar chamor gorem. He is this strong-boned donkey, Rashi says. He's bal atzamos. He has strong bones. Now, he's rovetz ben hamishpasoyim, right? That he, different approaches in the Mefarshim. Either he lies down wherever, ben hamishpasoyim, between the borders, wherever he happens to be, he's not fussy about where he lies down. Some say that he doesn't travel far, right? He ends up, right, lying down within his borders. And all of this ties into the fact that Yisachar, out of all the shevatim, is viewed as the greatest in Torah. Okay? Yisachar, there's a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, Yisachar, Yodei Bina Le'itim. They are the people who know, deeply understand the times and the changes of times. They say 200 Roshei Sanhedros came out of Yisachar. 200 heads of Sanhedrin, and they were in charge of setting the Jewish calendar and all these things. This was Yisachar. That's why they explain later, they say, Vayhi Mas Oved, that he was he had to pay his tax and work, that he ended up working for Am Yisrael. In other words, the fact that he's the big Talmud Chacham doesn't mean that life is a breeze, right? It means that, right, even though it says, Vayam Menucha Ki Tov, he saw that he wanted a state of menucha, of rest and peace, so that he could do his hard work. And then you end up being Masoved. The Sforno says an interesting thing. He quotes from the Gemara. He says that that if you have a tzur b'merabonon in a town, if you have a Talmud Chacham in the town, he says everything in the town, right, is dependent on that Talmud Chacham. He has to take responsibility. He has to step up. So why in the world would we compare this giant of Torah to a donkey, right? For some reason, in the stereotypes that people talk about now, donkey is equated with stupid, right? Stubborn is usually there, which is so interesting because we'll see in Chazal that they ascribe the opposite to the donkey in many ways. People call each other names. Adayom hazeh in Hebrew, those chamor or something like this. You're a donkey. Why would the Torah call Yisachar out of all shevatim? Why would he call him that? Somebody once said, he was sitting on a bus and a kid got angry with his mother and he called her chamor. And his brother said, Lo karim lima chamor, chamora. Anyway, but it's this insult. So what are the positive sides of it? Just fleshing out the positive sides of the chamor. There's a Zohar HaKadosh says that the word chamor is Rashi Tevos Chacham Mufla V'Ram Rabbanon, an amazing Chacham and the highest of Rabbonim. That's Rashi Tevos chamor, the donkey. I'll tell you an interesting thing later. Just we see chamorim really mentioned throughout Bereshis in all sorts of ways. When
page in Gemara that we did today.
Yeah,
Kept on mentioning
correct. In today's daf, nachon. That's once Rav Moshe Shapira asked us, just as like a thought question. He didn't give us the answer. When the brothers discover, right, that the cup is there in the thing of Binyamin, and they say that it's all a trick, right, to take us ve'es chamorenu and our donkeys. He said, why in the world would they mention that at that time, right? And our donkeys. It's like one time our apartment was robbed years ago, and we used to have this jar with like candies in it, and apparently the robbers like ate the candies, and the kids saw that and they started crying. You know, they forget about the other stuff they stole, but they ate the candies. So that seems to be, the donkeys seem to be a side thing. Okay, so we're going to open it up with a fascinating Gemara. The Gemara says in the Nedarim, Pei Aleph, it says, "Mipnei ma ein b'neim shel talmidei chachamim." Why is it that it doesn't always work that the children of talmidei chachamim are talmidei chachamim? right? There are certain dynasties where you see, but a lot of times, even in history, if you look deeply into the dynasties, there were a few of those kids that didn't get written down in the history books. There weren't such Talmidei Chachamim, right? It doesn't go. It doesn't always go. So the Gemara brings a variety of theories. One is that nobody should give up saying, oh, I don't come from one of those families, I'll never be a Talmid Chacham. So that they shouldn't be arrogant and lord it over people, right? They shouldn't say the Torah only belongs to other people. Rav Ashi brings a fascinating thing. He says, you know why? He says, because these Talmidei Chachamim call other people chamorim. They call other people donkeys. Very strange, right? Why that, and why particularly would it affect, right, the children and such? So Reb Tzadok HaKohen says, he says that the Talmidei Chachamim, their children don't come out that way. The Karolin Sheichamri, Hainu Shemizgoyim al Hatzibur b'Chachmasam, that they're arrogant in their wisdom. Lahachshiv kol ketipshim. They think everybody else is stupid. And he says, V'chamor tipesh shebehema. He says the chamor is not an intellectual superstar. Okay, but the chamor has its positive sides. Let's get practical and think about when and where people use donkeys. A horse is a much more handsome animal, much more exciting animal. He has more speed. The donkey is good for carrying heavy weights over difficult terrain. That's the mile of the donkey. The donkey can put one foot in front of the other. He plods, but he gets there. And he can get there doing these things slowly, step by step. Right? That's why you'll see in even these tours in the Grand Canyon and such, they go with donkeys. And that's the mile of the donkey. He's strong-boned. He's able to bear a weight. And this is where it's interesting. This is why we say he doesn't rebel against the weight. That's why I wonder what the laziness. It's true, people tend to whack the donkey with a stick to get him to go. But once he's going, he goes.
You must also have an amazing vision. You mentioned the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
We did, many years ago, we did a trail on donkeys, and we could not believe how close to the edge.
Yeah. Just thinking about it. Right, they're able to pick their steps and to go step by step and to keep going. So here, this is how the Talmud Rebbe kind of built the scenario. Why does this affect the children of the Talmud Chacham? Because in reality, everybody has to build up stage by stage, step by step. Beginning steps aren't impressive in anything. When a person starts to learn a musical instrument, if you've ever been stuck in a house with somebody who's like trying to learn guitar, blink, 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 etc., eventually he learns and he plays. Right? Each thing which is there, those initial steps aren't exciting, right? They're not always that pretty, etc., but they're very important. And if the kids who have to go through that process of those initial stages feel that they are undervalued, they're going to try to skip them. And if they skip them, they don't get there. So he said, imagine a scenario, a kid comes home from shul, and he tells his father, he says, oh, Mr. Goldstein, right, made a l'chaim today after davening because he made a siyum. He said, Goldstein, what do you make a siyum on? Chumash Bereshis. He's like, Chumash Bereshis. Man's a chamor. He's a donkey. And suddenly it registers with the kid that learning Chumash is worthless. So he doesn't learn Chumash. He just wants to jump onto something else. Right? Each thing that's there gets undervalued. Right? You say, you know, Mr. So-and-so has been learning 2 Mishnayos a day, right, for the past 6 years, and he finished X, Y, and Z, 2 Mishnayos a day. He's a donkey. Again, that gets him to undervalue the real growth that comes from the building up of small steps gradually. And therefore, he skips over those steps, and therefore he doesn't develop into a Talmud Chacham. The Rebbe said, he once read a psychology book about a person. He had a controversial way of therapy, but sometimes he said if he would discover people that had never crawled. Some kids don't crawl. They just skip over that stage. They're just kind of like sitting there and pushing around, and the next thing you know, they're kind of toddling, but they didn't crawl. So if he discovered an adult who somehow knew that he didn't crawl, he would have them crawl in his office. He would say, because you must do that stage. It's something in development that it has to be done. Part of your problems, he would tell them, is that you are missing that, whatever it is. Is it real? Does it work? I don't know. But the concept is one which is very important, right? That when a person loses and misses, so this is the mila of the chamor, this is the beauty of the chamor. Small steps. Rav Wolbe says in his sefer that all progress must be done with small steps, right? He says, first of all, a step which is big can trigger what he calls the mered reflex, the rebellion reflex. If you put a weight on yourself which is too heavy, so you're not going to be able to continue with it, and then not only do you not continue, you get angry and you throw it off, right? So that person who says, I want to learn Mishnayos, I'm not going to learn 2 Mishnayos a day, I'm going to do a parak a day. And he keeps that up maybe for a week, and then he falls behind, and he's behind 3 prakim, and eventually, throws the Mishnah back onto the shelf and never touches it again. Whereas the person who plods around like a donkey, doing his 2 Mishnayos a day, 2 Mishnayos and 2 Mishnayos or 4 Mishnayos, etc., and his understanding goes and grows. The Talmud Rebbe paraphrased, he said, I think it was the Imri Emes who once said, the Yetzer Hara doesn't mind if you do something like stay up all night to learn. It'll even buy you the coffee, right? Why? Because he knows that in the long game, you're going to end up oversleeping the next day. You're going to be irritable. All these things, it may be flashy and exciting, but it doesn't really get there. He said, but if you try to set 15 minutes a day, every day, that time slot to learn something, you'll feel the Yetzer Hara fighting against it tooth and nail, because that's where the real progress comes from. So it requires strong bones, meaning it's hard to keep up putting the foot in front of each other where you don't see exciting progress, where you're not galloping, right? Where you're not, it's just going. But this is how Yisachar gets to be the Yodei Bina La'itim. And they're able to have joy in it. They're happy with their lot. Vayam menucha kitov. Menucha doesn't mean that they're chilling out. Menucha means that you are in your right place. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And then VaYechi chmol yisbol, he puts his shoulder down to bear the weight and to go to do it. So this is something that is so hard because little steps are undervalued. And we have to realize that all of them are important. Rav Wolbe once said that after the Yom Kippur War, they brought him to speak to soldiers who were serving right on the Egyptian border, maybe even into Egypt, or what the Egyptian border was at the time. And they flew him there in a military plane, and he noticed that the plane was flying unusually low. So he asked the staff, why are we flying so low? They said, we're flying under Egyptian radar. So he said, I just understood something. He said, Yetzer Hara also has radar. When a person tries to fly high, right, to do big things, flashy things, it sets off the Yetzer Hara's radar, and he shoots the missiles to bring you down. If you go low, right, little by little by little, the Yetzer Hara doesn't catch it up on the radar. It doesn't shoot you down. It doesn't get it there. Okay, so these are the one lesson that we're supposed to learn from the Chamor. And the Chamor really represents also taking physicality and bending it to the purposes and elevating it. That's how that Chamor, that on one hand, right, is viewed as the Am HaDomeh LeChamor, right, and Besar Chamorim Chamorim, it says about the Egyptians, their flesh is the flesh of donkeys, representing physicality and taiva. But if it's your person riding on the donkey is an Avraham Avinu, is a Moshe Rabbeinu, or is Mashiach, so then that donkey is elevated, and all of that physicality is put into the right place. There's another aspect of the donkey that's described, and that is the idea of pashtus, of simplicity. Right? The Maharal speaks about this. He says that the donkey is a very simple animal. His food is very simple, basically whatever is growing, right? His needs are very simple. He doesn't do exciting things. You don't have to train him like a horse. There's the whole world of training horses and the relationship between the rider and the horse and such. Notice there, it's simplicity. Now, we shouldn't think that simplicity is something negative or something low or something to be looked down upon. Okay, what it's called in Hebrew is pashtus, something which is pashut. And listen to a beautiful letter from Rav Hutner that can help us understand this. Rav Hutner wrote this year Tafresh Tzadi Hey. He said, when we look at the word gadol in Hebrew, he says, when we speak about it in terms of the spiritual, right, it's an interesting thing. We'll describe someone as a gadol. We're not speaking about his physicality. Rav Moshe was under 5 feet tall, right, but he was a great gadol. Okay, but he says sometimes we'll speak about gadol in opposition to katan, to somebody who's little, meaning even small in stature spiritually. And sometimes we'll talk about gadol versus pashut, someone simple. Now he says here this is a bit of a mistake, because if you look at the relationship between big and small, the big has everything the small has, just more of it. Meaning if I have a 1.5 liter bottle of Coca-Cola and a 500 milliliter bottle of Coca-Cola, one is big, one is small. The small doesn't have any essential advantage over the big, because the big has everything that the small has, just more. It's easier to carry, okay, that's not something essential to it. But he says when we look at the comparison of what's called pashut and murkav, pashut means simple, right? Like in halacha, what's called pshute kli eitz eino makablim tuma. If you have something, you may even use it. It's wood, but it's simply, it's not in any form, in any shape of a vessel. It has no kli kibul. It's like a rolling pin, let's say, made out of wood. Just a pshute kli eitz, it doesn't makabel tuma. It's not bad. There's not something wrong with it. It has this aspect of pashtus. So he says, in looking at murkav, at complex versus pashut, simple, you're not realizing that the complex doesn't have something that the pashut has. And that's the maila of pashtus. That's the maila of this straight simplicity. And again, it's so hard when you translate it into English, because simple already comes to our mind, a simpleton, right? And things like this, implying a person who's not very smart, there's a greatness, he says. He says the murkav is mishulal hu agadol merchusho hanifla shel hapashut. He's missing the tremendous gifts, the tremendous treasures that the person who is simple has, and that's what's called pashtus. He says that there's what's called, and it's hard to use this word, what they call the hamon. Don't like to translate into what's called the masses, which also has a negative connotation in English. But the general body of the Jewish people, right, who are not, so to speak, the greatest, most complex people, he says, don't view them as small compared to large, right? In other words, if you view me and Moshe Feinstein or something, don't say, okay, he's little and he's big. He said, no, he is big, but he is simple. Okay? Halavai should be simple, what they call a pashat yid. They have this amazing maila, which is called pashtus. And he says this is expressed even in Avodas Hashem. He says they're often able to feel things more. They can be, let's say, less cynical. They can not be swerved so much. I'll give you an example of it from history in a second. And therefore, Rav Hutner says you have to take advantage of the time in which you are with simple Jews to try and learn this mila of simplicity, right? To try to learn to take it on. Again, a person who's very complex and has all this complex Torah knowledge is still complex, but you have to learn the beauty of pashtus and to be able to use it and to put it on when you can. He says this is also, he gave him the thought about the arava, that is the most pashut out of the arba minim. Chazal described it as no tam and no reach, right? As opposed to no taste, no smell, but nonetheless, Hoshana Rabbah is the most powerful of those days of Sukkot. And that's the day of the arava. He says because it does have a tam and reach, it does have a taste and smell, just it's one that is very different than the sweetness of those other ones. Okay, and so this is what he says here. So let's take a look about the mile of Pashtus. Historically, we have the writings of someone who was called the Hasid Yavitz. The Hasid Yavitz was in Spain during the expulsion. And we have different things. We have Perush on Pirkei Avos, but he also wrote kind of a diary describing what happened. And he said that there were basically two groups of Jews, two socioeconomic groups, you could call them, of Jews in Spain. There were some who were usually wealthier, better educated, both in Jewish and secular studies, so to speak, and much more integrated in Spanish society. They were much more successful. They were, during the good years in Spain, Jews were really doing quite well. They were doing well. But there were always simple, poor Jews who were less educated, not only less education in terms of Spanish education, but even in Jewish education, less, more poor. When the edict came out to convert or leave, he said it was only among the upper classes there that the idea came of maybe we'll convert on the outside and hide our Judaism, etc. He said the simple Jews, they simply packed their bags. And you would ask them, where are you going? Don't know. What are you going to do? We don't know. So how are you going? Because they said if I stay here, I have to be a Christian. And I'm a Jew, so I have to go. And he said that is a tremendous strength which is there in Am Yisrael. Emunah Pshuta. A lot of times we are so complex and so fakrimt with all our things that we can end up tying ourselves in knots. Whereas just to be able to be simple, straight with these things. I'll just mention, I don't know, it's coming. My grandmother, Aleh Shalom, one time in school, they had us do a project. Ooh, it's almost my time. The clock is slow. They had us do a project where they said, interview your grandparents. So I interviewed my grandmother. I'd never talked to her about these things before. And she told me a little bit of her history, that she was in this village in Russia and there had been some pogroms and things. And she had a brother who said, that's it. We have a relative in America. I'm going to America. My grandmother was a teenage girl at that time. He said, if you want to come with me. If not, that's it. So she went, right? And she came to Boston there in the early 1900s. And somehow she stayed religious, right? Which was almost unheard of. Yeah, for a girl coming at that age, right, to that area, all these things. And people used to make fun of them. She used to always call them the anarchisten, the anarchists, right? Used to make fun of anyone who was religious. And I asked her, I said, how did you do it? How did you have the strength to do it? She said there were two things that she got from a woman she called Pesia d'Almona. Pesia d'Almona was in her village. This Pesia, she said, had two things. She was a widow, and she was a bit more wealthy than some of the other people. She did for her two things. One is she taught her how to read, which wasn't a given, and she read with her the Tzenurena. The Tzenurena is this Yiddish translation, the Taich Chumash, with different midrashim and stories. And also, she said, they were visiting Rabbanim, Tzadikim, she didn't know who they were, who had come to spend the Shabbos in the town. And because she had a sizable house, they would stay in her house and do whatever they did, a tish or something. And this Pesia let her stay in the house and sit on the stairs and watch. She said those were the two things that gave her that strength. Pashut is no pashut, exactly. So that is something that we have to take a look at and to see and to tie in. That's the donkey, right? A horse, a stallion, they have their thoroughbred lineage. They can do all these jumps and dressage and all these things. And the donkey can't do any of that. He's much more simple, but he's much more strong. And the Torah is telling us that the pathway to greatness in Torah actually comes through that simplicity. Okay, may we be zocheh to be pasha to Yidden, like I say.